It was a Tuesday morning in the middle of Manhattan, and the downtown Starbucks was packed with its usual mix of corporate workers, students, and caffeine addicts. The line was long, the baristas were moving fast, and the espresso machines hissed as orders were rushed out. Behind the counter, Daniel Carter, a quiet, unassuming barista, worked efficiently, pouring lattes and calling out names. He was focused, polite, and professional. But today, he was about to have his worst shift ever. Because today, Karen Wilcox walked in. Karen was in her late 40s, dressed in an expensive blazer, her blonde hair styled in a perfect bob. She walked into Starbucks like she owned the place, her heels clicking loudly against the tile floor. She bypassed the entire line, marching straight to the counter. Daniel had just finished preparing a caramel macchiato when she snapped her fingers at him. "Excuse me." "Hello," she said, her voice sharp. Daniel blinked. "A good morning, ma'am." The line starts. Karen rolled her eyes. "I don't have time to wait in line. I just need a simple coffee." Daniel glanced at the long line of customers glaring at her. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but—" Karen slammed her designer purse onto the counter. "Do you know who I am?" she snapped. "I'm a loyal customer. I come here every morning." Daniel kept his tone calm. "I understand, but we have a policy. If you'd like to place an order, I'll have to ask you to." Karen leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "What did you just say to me?" she hissed. Daniel sighed. "I said, we have a policy." Karen cut him off. "Are you talking back to me?" At this point, people in line were whispering and recording on their phones. Daniel exhaled slowly. "No, ma'am. I'm just explaining. I want to speak to the manager." Karen shouted. Daniel nodded. "Sure." He turned to his shift supervisor, Lisa, who had been watching the entire thing unfold. Lisa was in her late 30s, experienced, and completely unimpressed by Karen's theatrics. She walked over, crossing her arms. "Ma'am, I saw everything," Lisa said. "If you'd like to order, you'll need to wait in line like everyone else." Karen's face turned red. "This is discrimination," she shrieked. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, we're treating you exactly like we treat every customer." Karen grabbed her phone. "Oh, you'll be hearing from my lawyer." Lisa sighed. "Have a great day." Karen stormed out. But she wasn't done. Not even close. 2 days later, Daniel was finishing his shift when his manager, Lisa, called him into the back office. She handed him a letter, thick, official-looking, printed on expensive paper. Daniel opened it, his stomach sinking as he read the words. Notice of lawsuit. Karen Wilcox was suing him. Lisa took the letter and read it out loud, shaking her head. The defendant, Daniel Carter, subjected the plaintiff to emotional distress, humiliation, and public embarrassment by refusing to provide service in a timely manner. Daniel rubbed his temples. Lisa kept reading. Furthermore, the plaintiff asserts that the Starbucks employee engaged in verbal aggression, violating the customer's consumer rights and causing psychological harm that has led to loss of work productivity and severe anxiety. Lisa snorted. "Severe anxiety? Because you told her to wait in line?" Daniel exhaled. "Lisa, she's crazy." Lisa rolled her eyes. "You think?" She flipped to the last page. Karen wasn't just suing Daniel. She was also suing Starbucks for $100,000 in damages. Daniel leaned back in his chair, stunned. "She's serious?" Lisa nodded. "Oh, she's serious." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "She's actually suing me for doing my job?" Lisa tossed the letter onto the desk. "I've seen some ridiculous lawsuits before," she said. "But this is next-level Karen insanity." That night, Daniel sat at his tiny apartment's kitchen table, staring at the lawsuit papers. He had never been sued before, never even gotten a parking ticket. And now, a woman was trying to take him to court over a cup of coffee. His phone buzzed. It was his older brother, Marcus Carter, a lawyer in corporate litigation. Daniel answered. "Marcus, I need help." Marcus chuckled. "I read the lawsuit. My firm got a copy this morning." Daniel groaned. "This is insane." Marcus sighed. "Yeah, it is." Daniel hesitated. "So, do I need to hire a lawyer?" Marcus laughed. "Little brother, you don't need a lawyer. You need a good popcorn machine." Daniel frowned. "What?" Marcus smirked. "Because this case, it's going to blow up in her face." Karen Wilcox sat in the lobby of her lawyer's office, crossing her arms and tapping her manicured nails against the table. She had waited 2 days for this meeting, and now that she was finally here, she expected results. The receptionist finally called her name. "Ms. Wilcox, Mr. Harrison will see you now." Karen grabbed her designer handbag and strode into the glass-walled office, where Leonard Harrison, a mid-tier civil attorney, was reviewing the lawsuit paperwork. He looked up, giving her a professional smile. "Mrs. Wilcox, please take a seat." Karen sat down, placing her Chanel purse neatly beside her. "So," she said, "how strong is my case?" Harrison hesitated for half a second. Then he forced a smile. "Well, there are some challenges," he admitted, shuffling through the papers. "But don't worry, we'll craft a strong argument." Karen leaned forward. "That Starbucks employee humiliated me. He refused to serve me. He publicly embarrassed me." Harrison nodded slowly. "Right." Karen crossed her arms. "And now I can't even go back there because they've banned me." Harrison's lips twitched slightly. Karen continued. "I've had to go to a different Starbucks every morning, which is totally inconvenient. And I have to relive the trauma every time I order a coffee." Harrison cleared his throat. "Of course." Karen sat up straight. "That barista needs to pay for what he did." Harrison hid a smirk, because what Karen didn't know was that this case, it was going to backfire spectacularly. Across town, in a high-rise office, Marcus Carter sat at a conference table with 2 other attorneys. The Starbucks legal team had officially stepped in, and they were laughing. "Is this a joke?" one of the Starbucks lawyers, Angela Moreno, said as she flipped through the lawsuit papers. "Apparently not," Marcus replied, smirking. Angela shook her head. "This lady is suing Starbucks because she was asked to wait in line like everyone else." Marcus grinned. "Yep." Angela rolled her eyes. Karen energy at maximum levels. The second lawyer, David Tran, set down his copy of the lawsuit and leaned back in his chair. "We're countersuing, right?" Marcus nodded. "Oh, absolutely." Angela smirked. "Good. Because if Karen Wilcox thinks she can shake down a billion-dollar corporation, she's about to learn a very expensive lesson." Karen Wilcox wasn't patient. After filing the lawsuit, she expected instant headlines. But when nothing happened, she decided to fix that herself. She called her friend at a local news station and arranged a TV interview. The next day, she sat in a news studio, perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. The reporter, Jennifer Clark, smiled at the camera. "Tonight, we speak with Karen Wilcox, a woman who is taking a stand against corporate mistreatment." Karen nodded dramatically. "That's right, Jennifer. I was bullied and discriminated against by a Starbucks employee. He made me feel small and insignificant." Jennifer tilted her head. "And what exactly happened?" Karen sighed. "I simply asked for my coffee, and he refused. He spoke to me like I was some kind of criminal." Jennifer nodded sympathetically. Karen continued. "I have suffered emotional distress. I have been traumatized, and I believe it's time for corporate bullies to be held accountable." She smiled. "I'm standing up for all mistreated customers." What Karen didn't know was that, as she spoke, people were already digging into her past, and within hours, her story was about to fall apart. Within 2 hours of the interview airing, the internet exploded. On Twitter, a barista from another Starbucks posted, "Karen Wilcox? I worked at a different Starbucks last year. She tried to cut the line every morning. If we told her to wait, she would scream at us. She called one of my coworkers a nobody. Glad she's finally being exposed." That tweet went viral. Then came the security footage leaks. Someone from a Starbucks where the incident happened leaked a CCTV clip. It clearly showed Karen cutting the line, snapping her fingers, and yelling at Daniel. The audio was loud and clear. Karen's voice. "Do you know who I am?" Daniel's voice. "Yes, ma'am, and the line is still over there." The clip hit 1 million views in an hour. Then came more stories. A former restaurant manager posted, "She sued my cafe 6 years ago over cold food. She lost. She's a serial complainer." A boutique clothing store clerk posted, "She tried to return a 10-year-old handbag last year and threatened to sue when we said no." Karen Wilcox was now public enemy number 1. She had wanted attention. Now she had too much of it. 2 days later, Karen received an urgent call from her lawyer, Leonard Harrison. Karen, he said, sounding tense, we have a problem. Karen rolled her eyes. What now? Harrison took a deep breath. Starbucks is countersuing you. Karen froze. Countersuing? She repeated. Yes, Harrison said. For defamation and legal harassment. Karen felt dizzy. That's ridiculous. Harrison sighed. Karen, their lawyers are sharks. They have more money than you can imagine, and they're not just trying to win this case. They're trying to crush you. Karen's heart pounded. They can't do that. Oh, they can, Harrison said, and they're demanding damages of $500,000. Karen dropped her phone. This was not how things were supposed to go. She had filed this lawsuit to teach Starbucks a lesson. Now, she was the one about to be destroyed. Karen sat in her living room, staring at her laptop. Her name was everywhere. Social media hated her. News outlets mocked her. Her lawsuit was a joke. She had become a walking meme. Her phone rang again. It was her lawyer. Harrison's voice was blunt. Karen, we need to talk about settling. Karen gritted her teeth. No, she wasn't going to back down. She was Karen Wilcox, and she was going to fight until the end, even if it destroyed her. Karen Wilcox sat in her lawyer's office, gripping her Starbucks cup with shaking hands. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had expected Daniel Carter to back down. She thought Starbucks would settle. Instead, she was being dragged into a legal nightmare. And now, her own lawyer was telling her to settle. Karen glared at Leonard Harrison, her attorney, who was flipping through a thick legal file filled with Starbucks counter-lawsuit. She crossed her arms. I'm not settling, she snapped. Harrison exhaled. Karen, listen to me. You are in trouble. She scoffed. They can't sue me. I'm the victim here. Harrison rubbed his temples. Karen, Starbucks has a team of corporate lawyers, and they are coming after you hard. He slid a legal document across the table. They're accusing you of defamation, fraud, and malicious prosecution. Karen blinked. What? Harrison sighed. Karen, the security footage from Starbucks is damning. It proves you weren't denied service. It shows you yelling at the staff. Karen's stomach twisted. I was just standing up for myself. Harrison shook his head. They're arguing that you knowingly filed a false lawsuit to extort money from Starbucks. Karen's face turned red. That's insane. Harrison cut her off. They want $500,000 in damages. Karen froze. Her mind reeled. $500,000. She had expected to win money from Starbucks. Now, she was the one who might have to pay. Across town, Daniel Carter sat in a high-rise office, sipping coffee as his brother, Marcus Carter, finished a phone call. Marcus smirked as he hung up. Well, Starbucks lawyers are having fun with this, he said. Daniel leaned back. They really think she's going to fight this. Marcus nodded. She's a Karen. Of course she is. Daniel shook his head. Man, I just wanted to do my job. I didn't think I'd be in the middle of a national lawsuit. Marcus chuckled. Well, congrats. You're officially the most famous barista in America. Daniel groaned. Great. Marcus handed him a tablet. Look at this, he said. Daniel scanned the news headlines on the screen. Karen Wilcox's lawsuit backfires as Starbucks fights back. Woman who sued over a latte now faces $500,000 countersuit. From coffee to court. How a Starbucks order turned into a legal disaster. Daniel exhaled. This is insane. Marcus smirked. It's about to get worse for her. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why? Marcus grinned. Because she has no idea what Starbucks is about to do next. The next morning, Karen sat on her couch, scrolling through her phone in horror. She was everywhere. Her face was all over social media. People were mocking her lawsuit, turning her into a meme. Twitter was brutal. Karen Wilcox, the woman who sued a barista and lost everything. This is what happens when entitlement meets corporate lawyers. She wanted money. Now she's about to lose her house. LMAO. Karen's hands shook as she scrolled. Her phone rang. It was her friend, Lisa. Karen answered immediately. Lisa, have you seen what they're saying about me? Lisa sighed. Karen, you need to stop. Karen froze. Stop what? Lisa hesitated. The lawsuit. This is ruining your life. Karen clenched her jaw. I can't just give up. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Karen, what happens if you lose?" Karen didn't answer, because for the first time, she was actually scared. That same morning, Leonard Harrison received a fax from Starbucks' legal team. The moment he read it, he knew his client was done for. He picked up his phone and called Karen immediately. She answered on the first ring. "What now?" she snapped. Harrison took a deep breath. "Karen, Starbucks just escalated their lawsuit." Karen's stomach sank. "Escalated?" she repeated. Harrison exhaled. "They've added a claim for fraudulent litigation." Karen blinked. What does that mean?" "It means," Harrison said slowly, "that if they win, you could be personally liable for even more damages." Karen's throat went dry. "How much?" she whispered. Harrison's voice was flat and cold. "Over $1 million. Karen's vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. She had just wanted a coffee. Now she was about to lose everything. Karen sat in her darkened apartment, surrounded by legal papers. Her lawyer had told her to settle. Her friends had told her to drop the case. But she had been too stubborn. Now, she was trapped. If she dropped the case, she'd still be facing counter lawsuits. If she fought, she'd lose even worse. For the first time, Karen Wilcox realized she had finally picked the wrong fight. Her phone rang again. She let go to voicemail, because she already knew what it said. It was over. Karen Wilcox sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents. Her coffee was cold, untouched. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News reporters, old friends, even strangers trying to get a comment. But Karen? She was frozen, because for the first time, she understood something terrifying. She had already lost. Her lawyer, Leonard Harrison, sat across from her, flipping through the latest court filings. "Karen," he said slowly, "Starbucks has offered you a settlement." Karen perked up. "A settlement?" she repeated, hope creeping into her voice. Harrison sighed. "Yes, but you're not going to like it." Karen clenched her fists. "How much?" Harrison slid a single page across the table. Karen's eyes scanned it desperately. Then she froze. Her stomach dropped. The document read, "Settlement offer. Defendant, Karen Wilcox. Drop all claims against Starbucks and Daniel Carter. Issue a public apology admitting the lawsuit was frivolous. Pay $250,000 in legal fees." Karen's hands trembled as she set the paper down. This isn't a settlement," she whispered. Harrison shrugged. "It's their way of saying, we could destroy you completely, but we're giving you an exit." Karen gritted her teeth. "No, I won't do it. I won't apologize." Harrison exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Karen, you don't have a choice anymore." Karen slammed her hands on the table. "I can't lose," she shrieked. Harrison's expression darkened. "Karen," he said quietly, "you already have." While Karen was spiraling, the internet was having a field day. The hashtag Karen Wilcox fails was trending worldwide. Memes flooded social media. A Starbucks cup labeled Karen's tears. A photo of Daniel Carter with the caption, "The barista who defeated a Karen." A parody video called "When Entitlement Goes Wrong." And then, a TikTok user leaked an old video of Karen at a different coffee shop. In the clip, she was yelling at a waiter, demanding a free meal because her latte was too foamy. The comments exploded. "This woman is a professional complainer. Karen Wilcox has been terrorizing baristas for years. This is why we need a Karen tax." Karen had wanted attention. Now she had too much of it. A day later, Karen's lawyer received a letter from Starbucks. It was short, direct, a final warning. "Dear Ms. Wilcox, in light of recent developments, Starbucks will proceed with its counter lawsuit unless you issue a formal apology within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in full legal action for defamation and fraudulent litigation. This is your last chance." Karen read the letter 3 times. Then she threw it across the room. "No," she whispered. "I won't let them win." She picked up her phone, opened Twitter, and started typing. But before she could hit post, her phone rang. It was her lawyer. She answered. "Leonard, I need to—" "Karen," Harrison cut her off, his voice serious. "Whatever you're about to do, stop." Karen froze. Harrison sighed. "I just got off the phone with Starbucks' legal team," he said. They're not bluffing. If you fight this, you'll lose your home, your savings, everything. Karen swallowed hard. Harrison took a deep breath. You have 48 hours to fix this, or they will destroy you. For the first time, true panic set in. Karen had thought she was invincible. Now, she was moments away from complete ruin. 2 days later, Karen Wilcox walked into a press conference, wearing dark sunglasses to hide her puffy, tear-streaked face. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing. She stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath, and then she did the one thing she swore she'd never do. She apologized. I would like to formally apologize to Starbucks, Daniel Carter, and the public for my actions, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. My lawsuit was misguided. I take full responsibility for the harm I've caused. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to say the last words. I deeply regret my actions. The cameras flashed wildly. The reporters fired questions at her. But Karen? She turned and walked away. Her entire life had been reduced to a public joke. And the worst part? She had done it to herself. That same night, Daniel Carter was sitting in his favorite coffee shop, sipping a free latte courtesy of his new job offer. After Karen's lawsuit collapsed, he had received job offers from law firms, coffee chains, and even a PR agency. His life had completely turned around. His phone buzzed. It was a news notification. Karen Wilcox drops lawsuit, issues public apology. Daniel smirked. Marcus, his lawyer brother, leaned over. You're famous now. Daniel laughed. For what? Telling a Karen to wait in line. Marcus grinned. Exactly. Daniel took another sip of his victory coffee, and for the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace. The world had moved on from Karen Wilcox. But Karen? She would never forget what happened. The lawsuit, the countersuit, the public humiliation. Her name had become synonymous with entitlement gone wrong. And now, she had to live with it. 2 weeks after her forced apology, Karen Wilcox sat at her kitchen table, staring at her bank statement. Her savings? Depleted. Her reputation? Destroyed. Her old friends? Avoiding her. The settlement had drained her financially, and Starbucks lawyers had refused to back down on legal fees. She had lost $250,000, and now she was dangerously close to bankruptcy. Karen had been a real estate agent for over a decade, but after her public meltdown, things changed. Clients canceled deals. Her brokerage stopped referring her to new buyers. And worst of all, her boss called her into the office one morning. Karen, he said, not meeting her eyes, we need to talk about your public image. Karen's stomach twisted. I don't see why this is relevant, she snapped. Her boss sighed. The firm doesn't want controversy, he said carefully. And after your lawsuit with Starbucks, Karen's hands curled into fists. You're firing me? Her boss exhaled, pushing a severance check across the desk. Karen's chest tightened. It was happening again. First, she had lost her case. Now, she was losing her career. She grabbed the check, stood up, and walked out without another word. For the first time, Karen Wilcox realized she had ruined herself. On the other side of the city, Daniel Carter sat at a coffee shop, not a Starbucks, but a small local cafe that had just offered him a manager position. After his name had gone viral, businesses had rushed to hire him. His legal nightmare was over. And now, he was finally getting back to normal life. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus, his lawyer brother. Guess what? Karen just lost her real estate job. She's officially hit rock bottom. Daniel stared at the text for a second. Then he shook his head, setting his phone down. For the first time, he actually felt bad for her. Because the truth was, Karen hadn't just lost a lawsuit. She had lost everything. For the next few months, Karen tried everything to rebuild her life. She started a YouTube channel, claiming she'd been unfairly canceled. Nobody watched. She tried to start a consulting business, but every time people Googled her name, they found a Starbucks lawsuit. She applied for new jobs, but every interview ended the same way. Aren't you that woman who sued Starbucks? Karen's face would turn red, and the interview would be over. The world had labeled her a Karen, and there was no escaping it. 1 year after the lawsuit, Karen Wilcox was no longer trending. Her name had faded from headlines. The internet had moved on. But Karen? She had lost her career, her reputation, and her pride. She had once believed she was untouchable, that the world would bend to her demands. Instead, she had been completely erased. And as she sat alone in a cheap apartment, drinking a store-bought coffee, she finally understood. Some battles aren't worth fighting, and some mistakes you never recover from.
Karen Wilcox had once been a woman of status, a respected real estate agent, a regular at high-end coffee shops, a person who demanded and expected the world to bend to her will. Now, she was nobody, a ghost of her former self, drifting through a city that had once bowed to her complaints, but now didn't even recognize her. Her life had become a downward spiral. Her real estate license expired, and no brokerage would take her back. She was blacklisted from Starbucks locations across the city. Every job application led to a dead end once people Googled her name. And the worst part? She couldn't even get a decent cup of coffee without seeing people whisper about her. She wasn't famous anymore. She was infamous. After months of rejection, Karen had no choice but to swallow her pride and take a job at a small retail store. Folding clothes, smiling at customers, earning minimum wage. She hated it, but she needed money, and this was the only place that would hire her. And every day, she lived in fear of being recognized. One day, a young woman walked into the store, browsing clothes. Karen was at the cash register, avoiding eye contact, praying she could get through her shift without incident. Then the customer froze. She squinted at Karen. "Wait," the woman said. "Aren't you that lady who sued Starbucks?" Karen's stomach dropped. I think you're mistaken," she said quickly. The woman's eyes widened. "Oh my God, it's you. I saw your interview." Karen forced a fake smile. "I really don't." The woman pulled out her phone. "Can I take a picture?" Karen clenched her fists. "No," she snapped. "Absolutely not." The woman laughed, shaking her head. "This is insane. You really work here?" Karen grabbed her register, trying to focus on anything else. The woman just smirked. "Well," she said, "at least now you know how to treat customers." And she walked out. Karen felt her face burn with shame. And for the first time, she wondered, would she ever escape this? Across town, Daniel Carter was sitting at a rooftop cafe, enjoying the perks of his new life. His phone buzzed with another job offer. A corporate coffee chain wanted him to manage a store. After the lawsuit, he had received countless opportunities. Everyone wanted the barista who defeated a Karen. His brother, Marcus, sat across from him, smirking. "You do realize," Marcus said, "you're the most famous barista in New York, right?" Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, it's kind of weird." Marcus leaned forward. "So," he said, "do you ever think about her?" Daniel hesitated. "Karen?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, wonder what she's up to." Daniel took a sip of his coffee, then shrugged. "I don't know," he admitted. "And honestly, I don't really care." Because for Daniel, Karen Wilcox didn't matter anymore. She had tried to ruin him. But in the end, she had ruined herself. And now, she was just another forgotten name in the city. One evening, Karen walked into a small coffee shop, different from the one she used to frequent. No one recognized her. No one cared. She ordered her drink quietly and took a seat by the window, staring at the people walking past. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be invisible. She wasn't important anymore. She wasn't a name in the news. She was just a cautionary tale. And as she sat there, sipping her coffee, she finally realized this was her life now. For months, Karen Wilcox had fought to stay relevant. She had tried to reclaim her old life, her career, her status, her reputation. But the world had moved on. And now, she was just another face in the crowd. Karen no longer spoke about the lawsuit. She had stopped trying to defend herself, stopped trying to explain why she had sued Starbucks, and stopped telling people how she had been wronged. Because she had finally realized no one cared. At work, her coworkers avoided her. At home, her phone never rang anymore. The few friends she still had were only there because they enjoyed gossiping about her downfall. Her world had shrunk to a tiny apartment, a low-paying job, and a reputation that could never be repaired. And she knew, deep down, this was her own doing. Daniel Carter barely thought about Karen anymore. His life had completely turned around. He had taken a new job, managing a high-end coffee shop. He had met new people, made connections, and finally moved past the nightmare of the lawsuit. His name was still known, but not in a bad way. Now, people respected him. Even some big law firms had reached out, offering him a legal fund if he ever wanted to take action against people like Karen in the future. But Daniel? He had no interest in revenge, because the best revenge was simply living well. One day, while grabbing a coffee at a small cafe, Daniel turned and froze. Across the room, sitting alone, was Karen Wilcox. She looked different. Her hair was no longer perfectly styled. Her clothes were cheaper, worn out. She was staring into her coffee, looking lost in thought. For a moment, Daniel considered walking over, saying something, but then Karen looked up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Daniel saw nothing in her expression. No anger, no defiance, no hatred, just defeat. Karen quickly looked away, pretending not to see him. Daniel hesitated. Then he turned and walked out, never looking back. Because Karen Wilcox was no longer his problem. She was nobody, just another person in a city full of forgotten faces. Months later, Karen quit social media. She moved to a new city where nobody knew her name. She found a small job, kept her head down, and tried to blend in. The lawsuits, the public backlash, the humiliation, it had all changed her. She had learned, far too late, that some battles aren't worth fighting. That entitlement doesn't win. That sometimes the best thing to do is just wait in line like everyone else.